All with the dreads? Oh, her.
She's the one who shot her.
Restraining order, but she shot her.
It goes in the car.
I'm licensed to carry.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, bitch.
You shot somebody, nigga. What put the gun in the car?
Hey,
She put the gun in the car. The gun is in the car. Arrest her.
The morning should have been ordinary, a school drop-off, a routine moment wrapped in backpacks, car doors, and hurried goodbyes. But instead, the air was torn apart by gunfire, sharp, sudden, and irreversible. Romeka Blackman collapsed outside her child's school, her body falling onto pavement that was never meant to bear witness to violence. Within seconds, the normal rhythm of the morning dissolved into panic. Parents screamed. Children were rushed inside. Sirens cut through the silence that followed, a silence heavy with disbelief. By the time first responders arrived, Romeka was gone. As investigators secured the scene, questions began to surface almost immediately. Not just about the shooter, not just about motive, but about the people who were there and what they may have known before the first shot was fired. One detail, whispered at first and then echoed across social media and court filings, would ignite a storm of speculation. A claim that on that very morning at a school drop-off, Carlos Smith may have been wearing a bulletproof vest. If true, it raised a chilling question. Why would anyone feel the need for protection in a place meant for children? This case would quickly become more than a shooting. It would become a puzzle of fear, foreknowledge, and fractured relationships, one where the smallest details carried enormous weight. Allegations would collide with denials, witness statements would shift, and a single question would linger over every stage of the investigation. What was Carlos afraid of? Romeka Blackman was not a stranger to struggle, but she was deeply familiar with perseverance. A devoted mother with one son, she had recently enrolled in nursing school, determined to build a better future not just for herself, but for the child who depended on her. Those close to her described a woman driven by responsibility, routine, and love, the kind of parent who showed up every day without fail. That morning was no different. She did what she had done countless times before. She brought her son to school. What she could not have known was that beneath the surface of that routine moment, tension had been building quietly, dangerously, among the adults connected to her life. Relationships marked by shared history, unresolved emotions, and jealousy would soon be dragged into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The shooting would leave behind more than grief. It would leave behind contradictions. Some witnesses described chaos. Others described moments that seemed almost rehearsed. Investigators would later examine timelines measured in seconds, body movements frozen in memory, and accounts shaped by fear and shock. But there was no video footage capturing the full incident, no clear recording to anchor truth to certainty. In cases like this, absence becomes as powerful as evidence. And then there was the vest. According to reports and circulating claims, questions emerged about whether Carlos arrived that morning already anticipating violence, whether protective gear, something rarely associated with school mornings, was worn as a precaution. Law enforcement has not publicly confirmed this detail, and it remains a point of dispute. But the very existence of the question would shape public perception. Because fear implies expectation, and expectation implies knowledge. As the community reeled, Romeka's family was left to face an unthinkable reality. A child who would never again be picked up from school by his mother. A future rewritten in a single moment. Grief settled into their lives like a permanent shadow, one that no courtroom decision could ever lift. This story would soon stretch far beyond the crime scene, into courtrooms, into online debates, into whispered conversations about what was known, what was ignored, and what might have been prevented. And as the case unfolded, the focus would widen from the act of violence itself to the conditions that allowed it to happen. The warning signs, the tensions, the fears that may have existed long before that morning. If this is your first time here, this is True Crime Tales, where we take the time to examine not just what happened, but why it matters. If you believe stories like Romeka's deserve careful, respectful attention, consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Because this case isn't just about a shooting. It's about fear, and whether that fear was justified or foretelling. Romeka Meeks Blackman was building a life defined by responsibility and forward motion. She was a devoted mother to her only son, structuring her days around his needs, his schedule, his safety. Recently, she had taken a decisive step toward a long-term future by enrolling in nursing school, a commitment that required discipline, focus, and sacrifice. Those close to her described a woman who was determined, present, and deeply rooted in the everyday routines of motherhood. Her world, however, was not isolated. It was intertwined with the father of her child, Carlos Smith, a man connected not just to Romeka, but also to another woman whose presence would later become central to the case. Carlos shared children with more than one partner, and the emotional geometry of those relationships created a fragile balance. Communication, boundaries, and trust were not always clearly defined, and tensions simmered beneath the surface long before the morning Romeka was killed. Holly Johnson, Carlos's girlfriend, occupied a complicated position within this dynamic. To some observers, she appeared increasingly uneasy about Romeka's proximity to Carlos, not merely as a co-parent, but as a persistent presence tied permanently to his life through their son. Social media interactions, court filings, and later testimony would suggest that Holly viewed Romeka as a threat to her relationship, whether real or perceived. In the months leading up to the shooting, allegations emerged that Holly had pressed charges claiming Romeka was threatening her through social media. According to available records, those claims were filed, but the legal process never fully unfolded. The issue was reportedly not served to Romeka, and she was never formally notified before her death. The accusation existed in paperwork, but not in a courtroom, leaving behind a troubling gap between claim and confirmation. That gap would later become significant, because to Romeka's family there was no indication that she believed herself to be in immediate danger. She continued her routines. She brought her son to school. She planned for the future. There were no known attempts to relocate, to change schedules, or to seek protection. Life moved forward even as unseen tensions quietly escalated. And those tensions did not exist in isolation. Accounts would later describe an atmosphere thick with jealousy, suspicion, and emotional strain. The kind that doesn't always explode immediately, but instead compresses, growing heavier with each unresolved interaction. Messages, glances, words left unsaid, moments that on their own might seem harmless, but together form a pattern of instability. What makes cases like this so unsettling is not just the violence itself, but the warning signs that appear clearer only in hindsight. Allegations of threats that were never served, relationships strained by shared history, a growing sense of rivalry framed around access, control, and belonging. And then there were the behaviors that raised eyebrows after the fact. Questions about whether Carlos anticipated violence that morning did not emerge from nowhere. They emerged from context, from claims, from observation, from the unsettling idea that fear may have existed before the first shot was fired. Whether that fear was justified or imagined remains disputed. But its presence, real or perceived, casts a long shadow over everything that followed. Red flags are rarely loud. More often they whisper. They appear in unresolved legal filings, in mounting distrust, in the belief that someone else poses a threat simply by existing within the same emotional orbit. They show up when protection feels necessary in places meant to be safe, when anticipation replaces surprise. By the time Romeka walked her son toward his school that morning, the fuse had already been lit, even if no one acknowledged it openly. And when violence finally erupted, it did not come from nowhere. It arrived at the end of a chain of events shaped by fear, control, and perception. The tragedy was not just what happened. It was everything that led up to it, unnoticed, unaddressed, and unresolved. The violence unfolded in seconds, but its impact would stretch far beyond that schoolyard. What began as a routine drop-off turned into chaos when a confrontation escalated without warning. In the presence of parents, children, and bystanders, gunfire erupted. Romeka Blackman was struck and fell to the ground outside her son's school, a place designed for safety, suddenly transformed into a crime scene. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. Romeka was pronounced dead at the scene. Her child, shielded from the worst of the moment, would later learn that his mother was never coming back.
She's hurt. She's the one who shot her.
Restraining order, but she shot her.
I'm licensed to carry.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, bitch.
You shot somebody, nigga. Put the gun in the car.
Hey,
She put the gun in the car. The gun is in the car. Arrest her.
Law enforcement moved in, securing the area as stunned parents were ushered away and the school went into lockdown. The shooter was taken into custody, and investigators began the painstaking process of reconstructing what had happened in those critical seconds. Without clear video footage of the shooting itself, the case immediately relied on witness statements, timelines, and physical evidence. And almost immediately, attention began drifting beyond the shooter. As videos from the aftermath spread online, particularly one that began trending on Facebook, viewers started to notice something unsettling. In footage recorded shortly after the shooting, Carlos Smith's body shape appeared noticeably different than in images from earlier that same morning. To some observers, his torso looked bulkier, unusually rigid beneath his clothing. Speculation spread rapidly. Online commenters questioned whether he may have been wearing some form of protective armor. No official confirmation has been released by authorities regarding a bulletproof vest, but the comparison between videos ignited widespread debate. The question wasn't just about appearance, it was about implication. If protection was worn, it suggested anticipation, and anticipation suggested fear. Further fueling suspicion were reports that Carlos changed his clothing after the incident. While changing clothes is not illegal and can occur for many reasons in traumatic situations, the timing drew attention. Investigators would later examine these actions as part of the broader timeline, noting how moments after the shooting became just as scrutinized as the moments before. In the absence of definitive video evidence, public analysis filled the void. Side-by-side images circulated. Body language was dissected. Movement, posture, and clothing were examined frame by frame. What once would have gone unnoticed became central to public discussion, a reflection of how modern investigations now unfold not just in police departments, but online. As detectives worked to separate fact from speculation, they focused on physical evidence, witness accounts, and digital records. Phone data, social media activity, and prior reports were reviewed to establish motive, opportunity, and intent. Investigators also examined earlier allegations involving tension between the parties, claims that had never been resolved before Romeka's death. In cases like this, the truth rarely arrives in a single piece. It emerges slowly, unevenly, often clouded by emotion and assumption. Each detail must be weighed carefully, especially when public perception threatens to outrun verified evidence. And yet the questions refuse to fade. Why did fear seem present before the violence? Why did so many people believe something was expected that morning? and how much meaning should be assigned to what people believe they see after the fact. As this case continues to unfold, it has reached far beyond the city where it happened. People across the country and beyond are watching closely, analyzing every update, every filing, every new image. And if you're watching this right now, wherever you are, you're part of that larger conversation. So take a moment and let us know, where are you watching from? Because Romeka's story has traveled far beyond that schoolyard, and the questions surrounding it have only grown louder with time. As the case moved into the courtroom, the narrative narrowed and sharpened. Holly Johnson stood at the center of the trial, facing the full weight of a murder charge. Her defense leaned heavily on claims of fear, perception, and self-defense, arguing that the events of that morning unfolded in a split second under extreme stress. With no video capturing the exact moment of the shooting, the case rested largely on witness testimony and the interpretation of intent. Prosecutors laid out a sequence they believed showed escalation rather than inevitability. The defense countered with doubt, questioning angles of observation, inconsistencies in memory, and the reliability of eyewitnesses who experienced chaos and fear themselves. Every second of that morning was dissected. Every movement was analyzed. The absence of definitive footage became one of the most powerful forces in the room. Yet as the trial unfolded, another presence loomed just beneath the surface. Carlos Smith was not on trial. He was not charged, but his proximity to the events before, during, and after the shooting made him impossible to ignore. As testimony unfolded, his role shifted from background figure to central connective thread, binding together the relationships, tensions, and unanswered questions that define the case. Carlos was there that morning. He was the father of Romeka's child. He was the partner of Holly, and according to various accounts, he was physically present during the confrontation that immediately preceded the gunfire. That fact alone ensured his actions would be examined under a microscope. As Holly's legal battle progressed, attention increasingly turned toward Carlos' behavior, not just in the moments of violence, but in the aftermath. Investigators and observers alike questioned what he knew when he knew it, and how his actions aligned with the unfolding tragedy. His statements became critical, not because they resolved uncertainty, but because they often introduced more of it. Questions emerged about preparedness, about fear, about expectation. If there was concern that violence might erupt, where did that concern originate? Was it shared? Was it expressed? Was it internal or communicated to others? And if fear existed before the shooting, what does that suggest about the conditions leading up to it? The speculation surrounding protective gear, whether accurate or not, intensified these questions. Even without official confirmation, the belief itself shaped public interpretation. Because belief in cases like this has power. It alters how testimony is received. It reframes memory. It reshapes trust. And then there were the actions after the shooting. Changing clothes, making public statements, posting messages expressing grief, attempting to maintain a connection with his son while facing resistance from Romeka's family. Each act, taken alone, could be explained. Trauma affects behavior in unpredictable ways, but taken together, they formed a pattern that many struggled to reconcile. Was Carlos reacting to shock or managing perception? Was he grieving or positioning himself within a narrative that was rapidly forming without him in control? And how much weight should be given to the words of a man who stood at the intersection of every relationship involved? In the courtroom, these questions hovered silently. They were not accusations. They were not conclusions. They were gaps, spaces where certainty could not fully reach.
And whatever you say to her, say it to her right there. The same way I have to do. I have to look right here, and I have to talk to her.
Romeka's family, those gaps were unbearable. Justice to them was not only about legal outcomes. It was about accountability, about clarity, about understanding how a mother could be taken during one of the most ordinary moments of her day. The community watched closely as the trial unfolded, recognizing that verdicts do not always deliver truth, only decisions based on what can be proven. And in a case defined by what was not recorded, not served, and not resolved, proof became elusive. As the legal process continued, one reality remained unchanged. Romeka Case was gone. Her son was growing up without her, and the people who shared her final moments would carry the weight of that mourning for the rest of their lives. The trial may determine Holly's fate, but the questions surrounding Carlos linger, unanswered, uncomfortable, and unresolved. And sometimes, in true crime, it is those unanswered questions that haunt the longest. As the courtroom doors closed at the end of each day, one truth remained unchanged. No verdict, no motion, no legal argument could undo what happened outside that school. Romeka Case was gone, and the life she was building for herself, for her son, had been cut short in a place where danger was never supposed to exist. Holly Johnson's fate would ultimately be decided by a jury, bound by evidence, testimony, and the limits of what could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But as the case unfolded, it became clear that the story did not end with one defendant. Because lingering behind the trial was a question that refused to fade. What about Carlos? In the eyes of the law, being present does not equal being guilty. Knowing someone does not mean sharing their intent, and suspicion alone is not enough to bring charges. Yet in true crime, proximity matters, especially when a person stands at the crossroads of every relationship involved. Legal experts have long noted that for someone like Carlos to face charges such as conspiracy or collusion, prosecutors would need clear evidence of prior knowledge or coordination, proof that a plan existed, proof that he knew about it, proof that he assisted, encouraged, or helped facilitate what happened that morning. And so far, no such charges have been filed. But questions remain. If fear existed before the shooting, where did it come from? If violence was anticipated, who anticipated it and why? Was there foreknowledge of danger, or was fear born entirely in the moment? These are not conclusions. They are the unanswered spaces between facts. Investigators have examined timelines, communications, and behavior. They have weighed what can be verified against what is believed. And unless new evidence emerges, messages, recordings, testimony that directly connects intent to action, the law may never move beyond where it currently stands. Still, public doubt does not fade easily. In cases like this, perception often runs parallel to justice, never fully intersecting. People look at actions before and after tragedy and search for meaning. They ask whether certain choices were instinctive or calculated, whether silence is protection or guilt, whether grief is real or performative. For Romeka's family, these questions are not academic. They are deeply personal. Their loss is permanent, and their search for understanding may never fully end. Justice, even if delivered, cannot return what was taken. It can only acknowledge that it mattered. And for the rest of us, watching from a distance, this case forces a difficult reflection on how quickly ordinary moments can turn fatal, on how unresolved conflict can escalate beyond control, on how fear, when left unchecked, can reshape lives forever. Do you believe the full truth has been uncovered? And if more is ever revealed, should accountability expand beyond the courtroom as it stands today? If this story moved you, challenged you, or raised questions you can't easily dismiss, support True Crime Tales by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you don't miss future investigations. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your discussion helps keep stories like Romeka Case in the public eye. Thank you for watching.